Have you ever imagined that a tiny cookie could change a person's life? A man who built a colossal tech empire, cold and distant, seemingly impervious to anything that could melt his heart. But a 4-year-old girl with yellow rubber gloves and a broken cookie made that man change forever. Join us as we explore this surprising and moving story about a famous CEO who taught us that sometimes the smallest things can make even the hardest hearts tremble. Don't miss it, because this story will make you believe that love and connection can come from the most unexpected places. John David did not live, he merely existed. His life was a series of ordered, unchanging activities meticulously scheduled down to the minute on his smartphone. His mornings began at 5:30 a.m., followed by an hour of exercise, a sugar-free vegetable smoothie, and then work. There were no spontaneous meetings, no waste of emotions, and especially no room for mistakes. At the age of 40, John David often referred to, with a respectful and fearful tone, as Monroe, had built a vast technology empire turning lifeless numbers on spreadsheets into millions of dollars, transforming himself into an icon of cold detachment. The media called him the iceberg, or the king of silence. He did not mind. If anything, those nicknames helped him maintain a safe distance from the world. His penthouse, perched on the 47th floor of a glass tower in Manhattan, reflected his soul perfectly. Everything was minimalist, sterile. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, turning the other skyscrapers into tiny Lego blocks. John David liked to look at everything from above. From here, the noise of the streets could not reach him, and the hurried people below became mere dots moving like ants. He liked that feeling of distance. It gave him absolute control. This morning, the early autumn sun streamed through the glass, casting a long golden streak across the walnut wood floor. John David stood before a deep red Persian rug, his gaze fixed on a small pale yellow stain right in the center. It was an intrusion that could not be tolerated. There was only one thing that could leave such a stain in his apartment: a pair of oversized yellow rubber gloves utterly inappropriate for an adult. A few seconds later, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Monroe." It was Ellen, the housekeeper, who had worked for him for 6 years. She was one of the few people who could endure his silence and strict demands. "The new cleaner started today. She brought her little daughter. I thought you should know." John David remained still, his silhouette etched in the golden sunlight. His fingers tapped lightly on the glass table. He did not respond, only nodded indifferently. Ellen understood. She was used to his nonverbal cues. A small nod meant she could leave. In the service hallway at the back of the apartment, Jennifer Oliver was scrubbing the marble floor. Sweat beaded on her forehead, not from exhaustion, but from the anxiety. The constant fear gripped her heart. She feared that Liaise, her 4-year-old daughter, would make noise or touch something she shouldn't. "Mom, can I help?" Lise whispered, her big round eyes following every move of her mother. "Sweetheart, stay over here in the corner," Jennifer gently instructed. "Remember what I told you. This is a very important person's house. We need to be very good and polite." Lise pouted, but nodded. Still, her eyes kept wandering over everything around her. This apartment was so different, magnificent, and vast, completely opposite to their cramped one-bedroom apartment back in Queens. Jennifer had gotten this job through a friend who worked in the same building. When she heard that the famous entrepreneur John David needed a cleaner, she applied without hesitation. The salary was much higher than what she could earn without a college degree. The only problem was Lise. Since the local daycare closed, Jennifer had to find a way to manage. Hiring a nanny cost nearly half her salary, and with no family in the city, she was stuck. During the interview, she had dared to ask Ellen if she could bring her daughter along. "Mr. Monroe doesn't like disturbances," Ellen had responded firmly, "but he's rarely home during the day. If the little one stays quiet and doesn't touch anything, I might ask him." To Jennifer's surprise, the answer was a nod. Now, on her second day of work, Jennifer still felt as if she were walking on eggshells. At home, Lise was a whirlwind of energy, active and clever. keeping her quiet for hours on end was nearly impossible. "If you're good today on our way home, I'll stop by Tony's Bakery and get you a cream-filled donut," Jennifer promised, knowing she was bribing her daughter, but it was a necessary evil. Lee smiled widely, showing a small, cute tooth. Her cheeks dimpled. "Can I wear my gloves?" she asked, pointing at the oversized yellow rubber gloves Jennifer had bought from a big store. Lais loved to mimic her mother with the housework. "All right, but only stay close to me." Lais put on the gloves, which were comically large on her tiny hands. She began pretending to clean a vase, focusing intently on her task. On the other side of the apartment, John David was reviewing documents in his office. He didn't usually work from home, preferring the impersonal, professional office environment, but today, he needed to sign a few urgent papers that his assistant had brought. The silence was nearly absolute, only occasionally broken by the faint clink of things being cleaned. John David liked it that way. Silence meant order, and order meant control. At 38, John David had built a technology empire. His company specialized in developing business management software for large corporations across the United States. He had started from scratch in a rented apartment and now managed over 30,000 employees. People called him the iceberg because of his calculated calm and the sense that what they saw was only the surface of something much bigger. That nickname didn't bother him. If anything, it was useful. No one dared to speak to him except about necessary matters. His cold gaze could freeze anyone who dared to cross the line. Even the vice presidents had to carefully choose their words when in his presence. Meetings with John David were known to be precise, direct, and often intimidating. What no one knew, or at least no one dared to mention, was that he hadn't always been this way. There was a time before everything fell apart when he used to laugh easily, when he believed in things beyond spreadsheets and contracts. But that time was gone, buried along with the memories he didn't want to revisit. The day passed in the controlled quiet that John David demanded. Occasionally, he heard Jennifer whispering to her daughter, "Stay here, darling," or "Don't touch that." He noticed that the cleaner was very professional, discreet, quick, and thorough. Even with a child present, she kept everything in order. Around noon, John David decided to head to the kitchen for coffee before returning to the pile of documents. That was when everything happened. As he turned the corner, he almost tripped over something small. Lais was standing there looking up at him with big brown eyes, her yellow rubber gloves swallowing her tiny hands. She was holding a cookie, a simple vanilla cookie that had been partially bitten. Time seemed to stop. John David, the man who made CEOs tremble, suddenly didn't know how to react. The little girl, on the other hand, showed no sign of fear. "Do you want a bite of my cookie?" Lise asked, with the cute confidence that only a child could have. "Mom says sharing is polite." At the end of the hall, Jennifer appeared with a bucket, her eyes wide with panic as she witnessed the scene. The cookie, her daughter, the millionaire, and her job were all vanishing before her eyes. "Lise," Jennifer cried, her voice urgent. "Come here right now. I'm so sorry, Mr. Monroe. But John David did not look at her. His gaze remained fixed on the small figure before him, on the oversized yellow gloves, the tiny hands, and the broken cookie offered as an invaluable gift. Something strange had happened. A moment of hesitation. A small crack in the perfect armor. John David, the iceberg. The man who never bowed to anyone slowly knelt until he was eye level with the child. "Thank you," he said. His voice, usually firm, now sounded surprisingly soft. To Jennifer's astonishment, watching breathlessly, he took the broken cookie from the small hands. Lais smiled brightly, as though she had just sealed the most important contract in the world. "This is vanilla cookie," she explained seriously. "It's my favorite." John David nodded, as though she had just given him crucial information for a multi-million-dollar negotiation. "It's been a long time since I had one of these," he said, and something in his tone, a hint of nostalgia that was almost unnoticeable, made Jennifer frown in confusion. "Lais, come here," Jennifer called again, still afraid of the consequences of that unexpected interaction. "Mr. Monroe is busy." But John David raised his hand in a subtle gesture enough to make Jennifer stay still. "It's fine," he said, still looking at Lise. "I'm not that busy." Whether it was the words or the way he spoke them, a chill ran down Jennifer's spine. In 2 days of working here, it was the first time she'd heard him speak more than a few words. And now he was kneeling in the hallway talking to her daughter, accepting a half-eaten cookie from small hands in yellow cleaning gloves. The world seemed to have flipped upside down. Lise, completely unaware of the extraordinary nature of the moment, continued. "Do you live alone in this big house?" she asked, her innocent eyes scanning the vast space. "Aren't you afraid of ghosts?" A strange sound escaped from John David's throat. Jennifer needed a moment to realize it was a laugh, brief, but unmistakably a laugh. "No," he answered. "I think the ghosts are afraid of me." Lise seriously pondered this, frowning. "You're not scary," she decided with the ruthless honesty of a child. Just then Ellen appeared in the hallway and froze at the sight. Her mouth dropped open, and for a moment no one moved. The fearsome executive, the one everyone avoided, was kneeling in the hallway talking to a 4-year-old. "Mr. Monroe," Ellen finally spoke, "your lunch is ready." John David stood up, his usual imposing demeanor returning, but something had changed. A lightness in his shoulders, perhaps a vague softness in his gaze. "Thank you for the cookie, Lise," he said, then turned to Jennifer. "Your daughter is welcome here." With that, he walked down the hallway, leaving the three of them in different states of shock. Ellen looked as if she'd seen a ghost. Jennifer exhaled as if she had just run a marathon. And Lise, completely unaware of the magic she had just created, only smiled and took another bite of her cookie. It was the beginning of something no one could have predicted. Something that started with a simple vanilla cookie and a pair of oversized yellow gloves. After the unexpected moment in the hallway, John David returned to his office, but the focus, once his sharpest weapon, had vanished. The numbers on his computer screen, the complex clauses in the contracts, all seemed meaningless. The image of a small girl with oversized yellow gloves, clear eyes, and an innocent voice lingered in his mind. It was like a crack in the perfect ice that couldn't be filled. He sat down in his chair, but the usual comfort was replaced by an inexplicable restlessness. For years he had built a world where only he and work existed. Emotions were locked away in a deep, dark basement. But today, a 4-year-old girl had found the key and opened that door with nothing more than a broken cookie. John David couldn't understand this feeling. It wasn't discomfort or anger. It was a disruption, a strange curiosity. He no longer heard the clink of objects being cleaned or the hum of the vacuum. All that remained was silence. He knew Jennifer was cleaning somewhere in the apartment, and he also knew Lise was with her. He wanted to hear her voice to know what she was doing. He realized he was longing for it. For an hour, he pretended to work, occasionally glancing at the door. The silence stretched so long it began to irritate him. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at Manhattan, but the familiar view no longer provided the peace it once had. Meanwhile, in another corner of the apartment, Jennifer was trying to regain her composure. She had almost fainted from panic when she saw her daughter approach John David. She had imagined being fired on the spot, but then things had unfolded in a completely unexpected way. "Lise, what did you say to him?" Jennifer asked, her voice trembling. "I just asked him if he wanted a cookie," Lise replied innocently, still engrossed in her cleaning task. "Mom says sharing is polite." Jennifer felt a deep sense of shame. She had taught her daughter moral lessons, but now she was so frightened that she wished she could take back those words when facing the powerful man. "Lise, you have to promise me you'll never ever go near Mr. Monroe again. Okay?" "Why, Mommy? He's really nice," Lise pouted. "He's not as scary as you thought." Jennifer fell silent. She didn't know how to explain it. How could she explain to a child that the adult world was so complicated that kindness could be a luxury and her innocence could cost them everything? She could only hug Lise tightly and whisper, "I just want to protect you. We have to be good and do a good job so I can stay here longer." Jennifer looked at Lise, who was still engrossed in her pretend cleaning, unaware that that moment had created a crack in John David's soul. In the following days, a subtle change began to unfold. John David no longer locked himself in his office all day. He began to accidentally pass by where Jennifer and Lies were cleaning. He would step out onto the balcony to take calls, walk into the kitchen to make coffee, or even stop in the hallway to read the paper. Each time he lingered a little longer enough to overhear the whispered conversations between the mother and daughter. "Mommy, why are the clouds white?" Lise asked. "Because they're made of water vapor, just like the steam rising from Mrs. Ellen's soup pot," Jennifer gently explained. John David, a man familiar with billion-dollar contracts, found himself fascinated by those simple explanations. They were more genuine and warm than any presentation he had ever heard. One afternoon, he stepped out into the hallway, where Lies was sitting obediently in a corner holding a coloring book. She looked up and saw him. "Hello, Mr. John," she said, her voice as clear as a bell. John David stopped. His heart skipped a beat. She called him by his first name. A strange feeling ran down his spine, a closeness he had denied for so long. He didn't correct her or object, just a small nod. "Hello, Lise," he said, his voice warmer than usual. Lies, unaware of the significance of the moment, continued coloring, occasionally glancing up at him with curious eyes. Day by day, those small interactions began to accumulate. John David was no longer just a shadow, a distant boss. He became Uncle John in Lies's eyes. She began telling him about her imaginary friends, the neighbor's dog, her dreams. John David listened with a patience no one on his board of directors had ever witnessed. Ellen, the housekeeper, silently observed what was unfolding. She had worked for John David long enough to know that this was a change like no other. She had seen him go from a successful, ambitious man to one who completely shut himself off from emotions. She had witnessed the disappearance of the smile from his face after his wife's death. She had once thought he would forever be the iceberg until the end of his life. "Do you think he's sick, like?" she asked Paul, the chauffeur, one time in the kitchen. "What do you think, maybe he's just tired of being an iceberg?" Paul replied with a wink. Jennifer also noticed the change. She couldn't explain why John David, the most powerful man in New York, was showing interest in her daughter. Sometimes she caught him looking at Lies, and in that moment she saw a deep sadness, a loneliness she knew all too well. It made her no longer afraid of him, but instead curious. One Friday morning, while Jennifer was organizing cleaning supplies, John David unexpectedly appeared. This was an area he rarely visited. Her heart raced. What was going on? Had he gotten tired of Lies? Had the little one broken something she didn't know about? "Jennifer?" he said, his voice still formal, but with something slightly different. "I'd like to talk to you." "Yes, Mr. Monroe," she replied, trying to stay calm. "Lise told me that tomorrow is your birthday." Jennifer was stunned. "Yes, Mr. Monroe. She's very excited about these things. She also told me that you're taking her to the park, but the weather forecast says it will rain this weekend." John David spoke bluntly, as if discussing a contract, but there was something different in his eyes. "I have a cabin in the Catskills. It's empty. I thought, maybe... Would you like to use it this weekend as a reward for your good work?" He said the last words seemingly hard for him to say. Blood rushed to Jennifer's face. A cabin in the Catskills. She hadn't left the city since moving from a small town 6 years ago, pregnant and alone. "I can't accept, Mr. Monroe. It's too generous." "This isn't generosity," he quickly replied, almost defensively. "It's been empty. It's a waste. And Lies..." He hesitated. "Lies said she's never seen snow." Jennifer couldn't help but let out a small laugh. "Snow she saw on TV, that sometimes there's snow on the mountains, and she's obsessed with the idea. I explained that it's not that simple and it probably won't happen." "Probably not," John David agreed. "But there are mountains, fresh air, and a fireplace. It's different from the city." This conversation was so unusual that Jennifer didn't know how to respond. This man, who hardly ever spoke to his executives, was now offering her a cabin just because a 4-year-old child had mentioned snow. "My driver can take you," he added, reading her hesitation. "And there's a local caretaker who will prepare everything. You'll have privacy." He cleared his throat. "Of course." Jennifer looked at her rough hands worn from work. A weekend in the Catskills. Ace would be so happy. It's very kind, Mr. Monroe, she said finally, still unsure if this was appropriate. If it really isn't any trouble. No, came the definitive answer. Paul will be here tomorrow at 8 a.m. Ellen will prepare a picnic basket for the trip, and that's that. John David nodded and walked away, leaving Jennifer standing in the service area wondering if she had imagined the whole conversation. It was a clear crack, a hole in the wall that John David had painstakingly built, and outside that wall there stood a woman and a child ready to bring him what he had denied for so many years: connection, warmth, and love. On Saturday morning, the familiar persistent drizzle of the city fell softly. Jennifer and Laïs were ready by 7:55 a.m., standing under the small awning of their modest building. The small suitcase rolled over the damp ground, and Laïs wore her thickest coat, a slightly oversized item from a thrift shop, along with the yellow rubber gloves she adamantly refused to take off. "They're my lucky gloves," Laïs explained when Jennifer tried to switch them for a pair of knitted gloves. "I made friends with Mr. John thanks to them." At exactly 8 a.m., a black Range Rover stopped in front of them. Paul John David's personal chauffeur, a middle-aged man with a kind expression, stepped out holding an umbrella. "Good morning, Ms. Oliver Laïs," he greeted warmly. "Ready for the adventure." Lise jumped up and down, her yellow gloves bright against the gray day. "We're going to see the snow, Uncle Paul?" Paul and Jennifer exchanged an amused glance as he loaded their luggage into the car. "Well, I can't promise snow," Paul said, "but the cabin has a fireplace, hot chocolate, and the most beautiful mountain view." What Paul didn't mention, and what completely stunned Jennifer when they arrived, was the true nature of the cabin. It wasn't the small, cozy log cabin she had imagined. It was a vast wood and stone villa, with huge glass windows overlooking rolling hills that looked like paintings. A meticulously maintained garden surrounded the house with winding stone paths leading through bushes and towering trees. "Is this the log cabin?" Jennifer whispered to Paul as Laïs eagerly ran ahead. "Is this Mr. Monroe's day?" "Yes," Paul smiled. "You should see his house in the Hamptons." A woman in her 60s greeted them at the door. Her name was Carmen, the local housekeeper. Her kind face and practical demeanor immediately put Jennifer at ease. "Welcome. Breakfast is served on the back porch, Mr. Monroe has given specific instructions to make sure you feel completely at home." The back porch turned out to be a covered wooden deck overlooking a small valley. The morning mist still hovered between the trees. A table was laid out with breadfruit pastries and coffee enough to make a five-star hotel feel embarrassed. "All of this is for us?" Jennifer asked in disbelief. "Of course," Carmen replied as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "And our little Laïs has a special surprise." In the center of the table was a covered dish. When Laïs lifted the lid, her eyes widened with joy. The vanilla cookies were decorated with colorful frosting, each one bearing a small, smiling face. "Look, Mommy, just like the ones I gave Mr. John." Jennifer picked up one of the cookies, a lump forming in her throat. John David, the man who made executives tremble, had remembered the type of cookie a 4-year-old girl had given him. That's when she noticed an envelope leaning against the breadbasket. Her name was written on it in elegant capital letters. With trembling hands, she opened it while Laïs busied herself with the cookies. Inside was a simple, elegant card with a few handwritten lines. "Happy birthday, Jennifer. Thank you for bringing a little light of your daughter into my life. Enjoy your weekend. J.D." She read the card 3 times, trying to grasp what was happening. A month ago, John David had been just a terrifying name, the unreachable millionaire she feared even looking at directly. Now he had given her a weekend at his mountain house and thanked her for Laïs's presence. Across from her, her daughter took a bite of the smiling cookie crumbs falling everywhere. The yellow rubber gloves, both ridiculous and endearing, stood out against the luxurious surroundings. Jennifer slid the card back into the envelope, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and confusion. Something else was going on, a story she couldn't quite name. A story behind the sad eyes, Lise had noticed a reason why such a closed-off man would open up to a child with cleaning gloves and a vanilla cookie. But just then, with the faint scent of coffee and warm bread in the air, with her daughter happily playing, and a day full of new experiences ahead, Jennifer decided that John David's mysteries could wait. Today was a good day, and for the first time in many years, she allowed herself to enjoy the present moment. Returning to the city on Sunday night brought a bundle of mixed emotions. The weekend in the Catskills felt like a dream. Strolls through the town, visits to chocolate shops, long walks along winding stone paths. Liaye was radiant, her cheeks rosy from the mountain air, her eyes lighting up with every new discovery. Of course there was no snow, but on one particularly cold morning, Carmen surprised them with an artificial snow machine set up in the yard. Another unspoken gift from Uncle John, as Liace insisted on calling him. For almost 2 hours, Liace played in the fake snow, building a small snowman and waving her arms to make snow angels in the beloved yellow gloves she now rarely took off. The drive back was relatively quiet, with Liace dozing in the back seat, clutching a teddy bear she had found on her bed. Another unspoken gift clearly placed there by John David. Paul respected the silence, only occasionally commenting on traffic or the weather. By the time they arrived back at Jennifer's modest apartment, it was past 9 p.m. Paul insisted on carrying the suitcase and a gift bag. Carmen had prepared homemade jam cookies and even a spare blanket from the cabin. "Thank you for everything, Paul," Jennifer said as he placed the items inside her small apartment. Liace, half asleep, went straight to bed. It was a wonderful weekend. Paul smiled a smile that indicated he knew more than he let on. "It's the boss's pleasure. Trust me, I've never seen him care about anything other than work like this." Before Jennifer could ask what he meant, Paul nodded and left, leaving her alone with her swirling thoughts. The apartment, after the grandeur of the cabin, seemed even smaller than before. The next morning, after dropping Liace off at the daycare, where she finally had a spot, Jennifer went to John David's apartment with a mix of gratitude and anxiety. How should she act? Thank him as if nothing special had happened. Her anxiety rose when Ellen announced that Mr. Monroe was at home. This was highly unusual for a Monday morning. "He requested to see you as soon as you arrived," the housekeeper said, her tone unreadable. Jennifer followed Ellen to John David's office, her heart pounding. A tension almost tangible filled the air, making her feel as though she were walking into a courtroom. John David stood by the window looking out over the city. He turned when she entered, and she was struck by his unfamiliar appearance. It wasn't physical, he still wore a perfectly tailored dark suit and maintained his usual upright posture, but there was something different in his eyes, something she couldn't name. "Jennifer," he said with a slight nod, "I hope you enjoyed the Catskills." "Babe." "It was wonderful, Mr. Monroe," she replied, the words flowing. "Lise loved everything. The artificial snow. She hasn't stopped talking about it. And the teddy bear and the cookies." She stopped herself, realizing she was rambling. "I mean, thank you for everything." He nodded briefly as if dismissing her thanks. "It was nothing," he said. After a pause, "How was your birthday?" The question took her by surprise. It was so ordinary, so natural, something a friend might ask. Not something John David, the CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the country, would ask his housekeeper. "It was the best birthday I've had in years," she admitted. "Thank you for the card." A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but filled with something unsaid. John David seemed to be carefully choosing his next words, something unusual for a man known for his succinctness. "May I ask you a personal question, Jennifer?" he asked gently. "Yes, of course," she said, her anxiety growing. "Who is Lisa's father?" Jennifer was taken aback, but she answered steadily, fiddling with her hands. "His name is Caleb Hart," she said. "We grew up in a small town up north. He worked the night shift at a garage and was trained as an EMT because he loved helping people. When I told him I was pregnant, he turned pale and said, 'All right, we'll figure it out.' He took on extra shifts. One night while working the night shift, the ambulance crashed on a patch of black ice on Route 17. His co-worker survived. Caleb didn't. I was 7 months pregnant at the time. I packed up and moved to the city because every siren felt like it was chasing me. I couldn't stay there anymore. She let the silence settle before adding gently, I didn't want Lise to carry the weight of a tragedy she didn't cause, so I tell her only the good and true things. Her father was a good man, he helped people. He loved us. And when she asks why he's not here, I tell her that sometimes the ones who love us first are the ones we carry with us, by the way we choose to live. John David remained silent for a long time, but she could see the empathy in his eyes. Jennifer, he finally said, his voice growing more formal, I'd like to make a proposal to you. Her stomach clenched. A proposal. What kind of proposal would a man like him make to someone like her? Her mind raced with the worst stories she had ever heard about wealthy men and their employees. But this didn't seem to fit John David, the man who had been charmed by her daughter's innocence, who remembered a 4-year-old girl's favorite cookie. I've been watching Lise, he continued, seemingly unaware of her anxiety. She's an extraordinary child, smart, curious, the type of person who deserves opportunities. Jennifer's body relaxed a little, although she still felt confused. Yes, she's very smart. She agreed, a small smile spreading across her face as she thought about her daughter. Sometimes I think she's too smart for her age. A smile briefly crossed John David's lips. I notice the daycare doesn't offer much in the way of education. I'd like to offer another option. Another option. There's a school not far from here, Oak Ridge Academy, one of the best early education programs in the city. They have an advanced cognitive development program, arts music. He paused, reading her face. I'd like to offer a scholarship for Lise. Jennifer felt the air leave the room. A scholarship to Oak Ridge Academy. She knew the place, or rather its reputation. It was where the city's elite sent their children. The waiting list was years long. Tuition was higher than her monthly salary. Mr. Monroe, I don't know what to say. She stammered, suddenly feeling small. It's an incredibly generous offer, but... This isn't charity, John David interrupted, as if he had anticipated her thoughts. Think of it as an investment. Lise has potential. It would be a waste not to develop it just because of financial issues. There was an intensity in his voice that made Jennifer wonder if there was something deeper behind this offer, something private that she couldn't see. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why are you doing this for us? You barely know us. John David looked away for a moment, and for the first time since she had met him, Jennifer had the impression that he was truly uncomfortable. Let's just say I recognize potential when I see it, he said finally. And maybe, he paused, considering his words, maybe I'm trying to settle a few debts with the universe. Before Jennifer could ask what that meant, his tone became more practical. I've spoken with the headmaster. They'll have a spot for her in the fall. There's plenty of time to prepare everything. Travel won't be an issue. It'll be arranged. Jennifer's mind spun. It was all too sudden, too unexpected. A part of her wanted to agree right away. What mother would turn down an opportunity like that? But another part felt uneasy, as if she were stepping into a debt she could never repay. I need to think about it, she said finally, and talk to Lise. She would have to leave her friends behind and adjust to a completely new environment. John David nodded, as if he respected her caution. Of course. Take all the time you need. He walked to his desk and took an envelope. Here's some information about the school and the program. It might help. Jennifer took it, feeling the weight of the paper between her fingers. It felt like holding her daughter's future in her hands. Thank you, she whispered, for thinking of Lise for all of this. He nodded briefly, but there was something in his eyes, a suppressed emotion perhaps, that made Jennifer wonder what truly motivated this man. Outside the office, her hands shook. The envelope in her bag was both a promise and a puzzle. As she returned to her work, her mind went back to his words about settling a few debts with the universe. What had happened in his life to turn him into the cold, distant man everyone feared? And Lise, with her yellow gloves and vanilla cookie, what had she stirred in him? That evening in their small apartment, Jennifer couldn't keep up with Lisa's excitement as they prepared their bags. Mommy, are we going to see snow? Can we build a snowman like in the Frozen movie? Is Mr. John coming with us? The last question took Jennifer by surprise. No, sweetheart. Mr. Monroe is just letting us borrow the house. He's a very busy man. Lise made a thoughtful face, something that always made her appear older than her age. He looks sad when he thinks no one is watching, she mumbled, folding her favorite scarf, a Christmas gift from the downstairs neighbor. Jennifer paused and looked at her daughter. Why do you say that, Lise? Lise shrugged with the innocent ease of a child. Because his eyes look like this, she said, pulling a very exaggerated, sad face that in another situation might have made Jennifer laugh. Jennifer sat down on the edge of the bed and pulled Lise closer. You're very perceptive. Sometimes adults are serious because of work. It doesn't mean they're sad. But he smiled when I talked to him, Lise insisted. Just a little, but he did smile. That night, while Lise slept soundly with her one-eyed teddy bear in her arms, Jennifer lay awake thinking about the strange turn of events in their lives. 3 weeks ago, she had longed for a job that would let her bring Lise along. Now she was about to spend a weekend at John David's mountain retreat, one of the wealthiest and most aloof men in New York, all because of a vanilla cookie and a pair of yellow rubber gloves. The next morning, when they arrived at the Catskills retreat, its opulence took Jennifer by surprise. Paul, John David's chauffeur, had brought them to a place that wasn't just a getaway, but a work of architectural art, a testament to John David's wealth and taste. The first day passed like a dream. Lise ran everywhere exploring winding stone paths and meticulously maintained gardens. That night in the spacious guest room, once Lise had fallen asleep, Jennifer sat on the balcony gazing out at the valley shrouded in mist. The warmth of the fireplace and the peaceful surroundings made her feel at ease. The next day, while they sat in the garden, Carmen the housekeeper brought out 2 cups of tea and a plate of cookies. She sat down with Jennifer and began talking about the house. She spoke of the wealthy guests who had visited, of lavish parties, and of John David's absence. Mr. Monroe rarely comes here, Carmen said, her voice tinged with sadness. He bought it after his wife passed away. Jennifer's heart skipped a beat. His wife? Carmen nodded. Yes, Isabel, a beautiful and kind woman. They were expecting a child, a little girl. She was 8 months pregnant, a car accident, right on the way here. This information struck Jennifer like a blow. Everything suddenly made sense. John David's coldness, the sadness in his eyes, and the surprising affection he had shown toward Lise. Carmen continued, her voice full of sorrow. He completely broke down. He built this house as a memorial, a way to cope with the pain. But he could never stay here for long. Every corner, every room reminded him of the memories. After that, he went back to the city and became the man people know today. Jennifer felt a deep empathy for John David. She understood that pain, the pain of losing a loved one, of having to continue living when part of you has died. She had experienced it herself, losing Caleb and having to raise Lise alone. She had once felt as though she couldn't go on, but for Lise, she had to be strong. That morning during breakfast, Jennifer decided she would speak to John David. She felt she owed him honesty. After returning to the apartment, she waited for Lise to fall asleep, then went to find him. John David was sitting on the balcony looking out over the city. Jennifer approached, and his silence no longer felt intimidating. It had become familiar. Mr. Monroe, she said gently, I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to speak with you. He turned around, and in his eyes, she saw the fatigue that Lise had noticed. It's all right, Jennifer. Go ahead. I spoke with Carmen at the Catskills. She told me about your wife and your daughter. John David's face stiffened, his eyes turning as cold as eternal ice. Jennifer feared she had gone too far, but she pressed on. I lost my husband too. He died before Lise was born. I know what that feels like. The pain of having to keep going when part of you has died. Her sharing seemed to melt the ice surrounding John David. He looked at her, and the coldness in his eyes gradually faded, replaced by a deep sadness. Her name was Anna Sophia, he said, his voice thick with emotion. My wife Isabel loved that name. She said it meant wisdom. That's a beautiful name. Jennifer whispered, holding back tears. John David continued as though speaking to himself. When I saw your daughter in the hallway with those ridiculous gloves and the cookie, it was like something that had been frozen inside me started to melt. And then when I learned her name Lise, he hesitated. I understand, Jennifer said softly. I know it sounds strange, he continued, looking directly into her eyes. I'm not trying to replace anyone. It's like the universe gave me a second chance. Not to be a father, but to make some kind of difference. Jennifer didn't know what to say. His story broke her heart, but it also explained everything. The coldness, the isolation, and the sudden connection with Liaki. It's not strange, she said finally. It's human. Those simple words seemed to touch something deep within him. For a brief moment, his mask wavered, and Jennifer saw the pain he had endured, a pain he may have never shared with anyone. After the accident, I buried myself in work, he said. I built this company, this fortress, and convinced myself it was the most important thing. Until a little girl with yellow gloves gave me a cookie. Jennifer continued, a small smile appearing on her lips, even though the story was sad. John David nodded, his eyes glistening, a reminder that life was more than spreadsheets and contracts. They stood in silence, embracing the weight of the words that had been spoken. Outside the city continued its endless rhythm, oblivious to the moment of connection taking place at this height. Uncle John, Mommy, the cookies are ready. Lisa's voice rang through the penthouse, breaking the silence with her innocent joy. John David blinked, and when he looked at Jennifer, the usual calm returned to his face, though something in his eyes had changed, become more open. It seems we've been called, he said, giving a small smile. As they walked to the kitchen, Jennifer felt a fundamental shift between them. It wasn't just that she had learned his secret. Somehow they had crossed the invisible boundary from boss and employee to something else, something she couldn't quite define. In the kitchen, they found Laias standing on a stool, wearing an apron and a makeshift chef's hat Ellen had made proudly, holding a tray of slightly crooked chocolate chip cookies. I made most of these myself, she declared. Ellen just helped me with the oven because it's dangerous. Great job. John David complimented, taking the cookie Lise handed him with the same seriousness he had shown when he first received the vanilla cookie weeks ago. Looking at Lise beaming with pride, John David tasted the cookie as if it were a gourmet dish. Ellen watched confused at first, then moved to admiration. Jennifer felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if this unusual group of people was becoming a family. That thought was both soothing and terrifying. In the weeks that followed, a strange yet comfortable routine had formed in the penthouse. Laias came with Jennifer 3 times a week. John David had altered his work schedule to be home on those days, a fact that Ellen deemed unprecedented. Although he never voiced it, it was clear that he looked forward to her visits. One particularly cold morning, while Jennifer was cleaning the bedrooms, she heard something that made her stop in her tracks. Laughter. Following the sound, she saw John David's office door slightly ajar, and what she saw inside was something she never could have imagined. John David, the formidable CEO, was sitting on the floor of his meticulously organized office. In front of him, Lise, still wearing her indispensable yellow gloves, was piecing together a complex puzzle. No, Uncle John. This piece is the sky, not the mountain, she instructed with the seriousness of a seasoned teacher. John David, with a patience entirely opposite to his reputation, simply nodded and handed the piece back. You're right. I'm not very good at this. That's because you haven't practiced, Lise said pragmatically. My teacher says everything gets better with practice. Your teacher sounds very wise, John David said. Yes, she's very wise, Lise agreed. Then, as if remembering something important, she added, Mom says I'm going to a new school called Oak Ridge. Jennifer held her breath. She had decided to accept the offer, but she hadn't told Lias all the details, only saying that she might be going to a new school. Oak Ridge Academy, John David gently corrected. How do you feel about that? Lias furrowed her brow, contemplating the question with the seriousness that children often bring to big matters. Can I wear my gloves there? John David seemed to stifle a smile. I think that would be fine. Maybe during recess. Do they have puzzles like this? I'm sure they have even better games, he said. And books and computers and many other things for you to learn. Lise was silent for a moment, reflecting. Then she asked with the surprising insight that often caught adults off guard. Did you go there when you were little? A shadow barely perceptible crossed John David's face. No, he said. When I was little, I went to a different school very far from here. Did you have a lot of friends? A simple question, but one that touched on something deep. John David paused before answering. Not many. I'll be your friend at the new school, Lise declared with absolute certainty. Even if you're not there. Jennifer quietly stepped back, feeling as though she were witnessing something too private. But John David's words and expressions stayed with her throughout the day. There was a key in that conversation not only for his recent changes, but also for a deeper mystery about the man behind the cold exterior. On Thursday that week, John David requested to speak with Jennifer again. This time it wasn't in the office, but on the rooftop, while Lise was in the kitchen with Ellen helping to bake cookies. I spoke with the headmaster of Oak Ridge, he said, his gaze on the city below. Everything is set for Lise to start in August. Jennifer nodded, a mix of gratitude and anxiety rising in her chest. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Monroe. Richard, he corrected, still not looking at her. After all this time, you can call me Richard. There was something almost vulnerable in the way he said it, as if he were offering her more than just his name. Richard, Jennifer repeated, trying the sound out. It felt strange, too intimate. Lise is so excited. She told everyone at daycare that she's going to a school with trees. A smile briefly crossed his lips. She's extraordinary. Yes, she's extraordinary. Jennifer hesitated, gathering the courage to ask the question that had haunted her for weeks. May I ask you a private question? He finally turned to face her, caution clear in his eyes. Why are you doing all of this for us? She continued gently but firmly. The truth. Not just because you see potential in Lise or because you're trying to settle some cosmic debt. The silence that followed was so thick, Jennifer could almost feel its weight. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer, that he would retreat back into his coldness. But then something in his expression gave way. I had a daughter, he said quietly, so softly that she had to lean in to hear. Or rather, I was supposed to. She never came into this world. The revelation hit Jennifer like a punch. Of all the possibilities she had imagined, this was not one of them. I'm so sorry, she murmured, knowing her words were inadequate. He made a vague gesture, brushing away her sympathy. It was a long time ago, 7 years. A car accident. My wife was 8 months pregnant. A lump rose in Jennifer's throat. 7 years. The same time Lise had been born. Suddenly everything made sense. Richard's attention to Lise, the scholarship, even the weekend in the Catskills. Her name was Anna Sophia. He said, his voice distant now, as if speaking of a time a life long past. Isabel, my wife, loved that name. She said it meant wisdom. That's beautiful, Jennifer whispered, holding back the tears that were threatening to fall. They weren't hers to shed. When I saw your daughter in the hallway with those ridiculous yellow gloves and the cookie, he paused, searching for the words. It was like something frozen inside me began to melt. And then when I learned her name, Sophie, I understand, Jennifer said gently. I know it might sound strange, even troubling, he continued, looking directly into her eyes. I'm not trying to replace anyone. It's like the universe gave me a second chance. Not to be a father, but to make a difference somehow. Jennifer didn't know what to say. His story broke her heart, and it explained so much. The coldness, the isolation, and the sudden connection with Liazzi. It's not strange, she said finally. It's human. Those simple words seemed to touch him deeply. For a brief moment, his mask wavered, and Jennifer caught a glimpse of the pain he had endured, a pain he may have never shared with anyone. After the accident, I buried myself in work, he said. I built this company, this fortress, and convinced myself it was the most important thing, until a little girl with yellow gloves gave me a cookie. Jennifer continued, a small smile appearing on her lips, even though the story was sad. Richard nodded, his eyes gleaming, a reminder that life was more than spreadsheets and contracts. They stood in silence, taking in the weight of what had been said. Outside, the city kept its unrelenting rhythm, oblivious to the moment of connection unfolding at this height. "Uncle Richard, Mommy, the cookies are ready!" Lisa's voice rang through the penthouse, breaking the silence with her innocent joy. Richard blinked, and when he looked at Jennifer, his usual calm had returned, though something in his eyes had changed, becoming more open. "It seems we've been called," he said, giving a small smile. As they walked to the kitchen, Jennifer felt a fundamental shift between them. It wasn't just that she now knew his secret. Somehow, they had crossed the invisible boundary from boss and employee to something else, something she couldn't quite define. In the kitchen, they found Layasi standing on a stool, wearing an apron and a makeshift chef's hat Ellen had made, proudly holding a tray of slightly misshapen chocolate chip cookies. "I made most of these myself," she declared. "Ellen just helped me with the oven because it's dangerous." "Wonderful," Richard praised, taking the cookie Lies handed him, with the same seriousness he had shown when he first accepted the vanilla cookie weeks ago. Looking at Lies beaming with pride, Richard tasted the cookie as if it were a gourmet dish. Ellen watched with a confused smile that slowly turned to admiration. Jennifer felt a strange sense of familiarity, as though this unusual group of people was becoming a family. That thought was both soothing and terrifying. July arrived with an unusually cold spell. On mornings, when Jennifer came to the penthouse, the window panes were fogged with dew, creating a thin veil that blurred the boundary between the luxury of the apartment and the streets waking up below. In the weeks following the scholarship offer, a strange but comfortable routine had formed. Lies now came with Jennifer 3 times a week. Richard had adjusted his schedule to be home on those days, something that Ellen considered unprecedented. Although he never voiced it, it was clear he looked forward to the little girl's visits. One particularly cold morning, while Jennifer was cleaning the bedrooms, she heard something that made her stop: laughter. Following the sound, she found Richard's office door slightly ajar and saw a scene she never could have imagined. Richard Monroe, the feared CEO, was sitting on the floor of his neat office. In front of him, Lies, still wearing her indispensable yellow gloves, was intently working on a complex puzzle. "No, Uncle Richard. This piece is the sky, not the mountain," she instructed with the seriousness of a seasoned teacher. Richard, with patience completely at odds with his reputation, simply nodded and handed the piece back. "You're right, I'm not very good at this." "That's because you haven't practiced," Lise said practically. "My teacher says everything gets better with practice." "Your teacher sounds very wise," Richard said. "Yes, she's very wise," Lise agreed. Then, as if remembering something important, she added, "Mom says I'm going to a new school called Oak Ridge." Jennifer held her breath. She had decided to accept the offer, but hadn't told Lies all the details, only mentioning that there might be a new school. "Oak Ridge Academy," Richard gently corrected. "And how do you feel about that?" Lise furrowed her brow, contemplating the question with the seriousness children reserve for big matters. "Can I bring my gloves there?" Richard seemed to suppress a smile. "I think that would be fine. Maybe during recess." "Do they have puzzles like this?" "I'm sure they have even better games," he said, "and books and computers and many other things for you to learn." Lise was silent for a moment, reflecting. Then she asked with the surprising insight that often startled adults, "Did you go there when you were little?" A shadow barely noticeable crossed Richard's face. "No," he said. "When I was little, I went to a different school very far from here." "Did you have many friends?" A simple question, but one that touched something deep. Richard paused before answering. "Not many. I'll be your friend at the new school," Lise declared with absolute certainty. "Even if you're not there." Jennifer quietly stepped back, feeling as though she were witnessing something too private, but Richard's words and expressions stayed with her all day. There was a key in that exchange, not only for his recent changes, but also for the deeper mystery of the man behind the cold exterior. On Thursday that week, Richard requested to speak with Jennifer again. This time, not in the office, but on the rooftop, while Lies was in the kitchen with Ellen helping to bake cookies. "I spoke with the headmaster of Oak Ridge. he said, his gaze on the city below. Everything is ready for Lies to start in August. Jennifer nodded, a mix of gratitude and anxiety rising in her chest. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Monroe. Richard, he corrected, still not looking at her. After all this time, you can call me Richard. There was something almost vulnerable in the way he said it, as if he were offering her more than just his name. Richard, Jennifer repeated, testing the sound. It felt strange, too intimate. Lise is so excited. She told everyone at daycare that she's going to a school with trees. A smile briefly crossed his lips. She's extraordinary. Yes, she's extraordinary. Jennifer hesitated, gathering the courage to ask the question that had haunted her for weeks. May I ask you a private question? He finally turned to face her, caution evident in his eyes. Why are you doing all of this for us? She continued gently but firmly. The truth. Not just because you see potential in Lieg or because you're trying to settle some cosmic debt. The silence that followed was so thick, Jennifer could almost feel its weight. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer, that he would retreat back into his coldness. But then something in his expression gave way. I had a daughter, he said quietly, so softly that she had to lean in to hear. Or rather, I was supposed to. She never came into this world. The revelation hit Jennifer like a punch. Of all the possibilities she had imagined, this was not one of them. I'm so sorry, she murmured, knowing her words were inadequate. He made a vague gesture, brushing away her sympathy. It was a long time ago, 7 years. A car accident. My wife was 8 months pregnant. A lump rose in Jennifer's throat. 7 years. The same time Lise had been born. Suddenly everything made sense. Richard's attention to Lies, the scholarship, even the weekend in Catskills. Her name was Anna Sophia, he said, his voice now distant, as if speaking of a time a life long past. Isabel, my wife, loved that name. She said it meant wisdom. That's beautiful, Jennifer whispered, holding back the tears that were threatening to fall. They weren't hers to shed. When I saw your daughter in the hallway with those ridiculous yellow gloves and the cookie, he paused, searching for the words. It was like something frozen inside me began to melt. And then when I learned her name, Sophie... I understand, Jennifer said gently. I know it might sound strange, even troubling, he continued, looking directly into her eyes. I'm not trying to replace anyone. It's like the universe gave me a second chance. Not to be a father, but to make a difference somehow. Jennifer didn't know what to say. His story broke her heart, and it explained so much. The coldness, the isolation, and the sudden connection with Liatzi. It's not strange, she said finally. It's human. Those simple words seemed to touch him deeply. For a brief moment, his mask wavered, and Jennifer saw the pain he had endured, a pain he may have never shared with anyone. After the accident, I buried myself in work, he said. I built this company, this fortress, and convinced myself it was the most important thing. Until a little girl with yellow gloves gave me a cookie. Jennifer continued, a small smile appearing on her lips, even though the story was sad. Richard nodded, his eyes gleaming, a reminder that life was more than spreadsheets and contracts. They stood in silence, taking in the weight of what had been said. Outside, the city kept its unrelenting rhythm, oblivious to the moment of connection unfolding at this height. Uncle Richard, Mommy, the cookies are ready. Lisa's voice rang through the penthouse, breaking the silence with her innocent joy. Richard blinked, and when he looked at Jennifer, his usual calm had returned, though something in his eyes had changed, becoming more open. It seems we've been called, he said, giving a small smile. As they walked to the kitchen, Jennifer felt a fundamental shift between them. It wasn't just that she now knew his secret. Somehow they had crossed the invisible boundary from boss and employee to something else, something she couldn't quite define. In the kitchen, they found Lise standing on a stool, wearing an apron and a makeshift chef's hat Ellen had made, proudly holding a tray of slightly misshapen chocolate chip cookies. I made most of these myself, she declared. Ellen just helped me with the oven because it's dangerous. Wonderful, Richard praised, taking the cookie Lies handed him, with the same seriousness he had shown when he first accepted the vanilla cookie weeks ago. Looking at Lise beaming with pride, Richard tasted the cookie as if it were a gourmet dish. Ellen watched with a confused smile that slowly turned to admiration. Jennifer felt a strange sense of familiarity, as though this unusual group of people was becoming a family. That thought was both soothing and terrifying. So the story of a man who seemed like he would never change has come to an end, but his journey has only just begun. From the simplest moments, we realize that sometimes love and connection don't need to be grand or perfect, just a heart wide enough to embrace them. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the upcoming videos full of emotion and surprises. And remember, even when life feels cold and indifferent, there are always those small moments that help us rediscover the light. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next stories. Don't forget to hit the bell to get notifications for new videos.